The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Fransson. Tonight's episode is Reverence for Life.
Good evening, everyone. It is time for Created in the Image of God. I have been very much looking forward to tonight's show. To give a little backdrop, as you know, we have talked often in recent months about how all the way back in the Garden of Eden, when Adam was created, before he was given Eve and told to be fruitful and multiply, his purpose was given to him by God. And that purpose was to dress and keep the garden. And we've talked about how people of all backgrounds, all perspectives, need to come together and build vibrant communities in order to chart a better course for this planet and to fulfill that commission and bring about the kingdom of God on earth. Well, tonight we have a gentleman with us who's been approaching this same topic in his own unique way, inspired by a man named Albert Schweitzer. I won't go into who Albert Schweitzer is, but he does play a prominent role in my own sort of philosophical development from the time I lived in Switzerland. And Bob Echols has spent many years now working on helping us understand how cultivating a reverence for all life is important. And he's written a book, or is in the process of writing a series of books called For Our Friends, the Animals. Bob explains why seeing animals as part of God's design changes everything, from our daily habits to how we advocate for their well-being. We're going to discover how these ancient truths and the purpose statement and the commandments fit in to our modern life. Welcome to the studio, Bob Echols.
Thank you very much, Wade. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, and it's been a journey. We've been meeting and discussing now probably for a couple of months in preparation for this show. We shared you much more than I, but our common interest in and love for Albert Schweitzer and his work. So we're going to jump into this by getting to know you first, as we often do on this show. And by the you, I mean the you that was placed here on earth before you took conscious thought in your path. What were the experiences that molded and shaped you and formed who you were later to become? Tell us a little bit about those early years, including your family background and where you were born, that kind of stuff.
Oh, happy to do that, Wade. And as I told you, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I'm used to talking at great length and expatiating even more. So please, when your audience says enough, let me know. But I was born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My father was a professor at the university there. Shortly after my birth, he moved to a small college prep town in New Hampshire called Exeter. And he was an instructor at Exeter, and that's where I grew up. Attended Phillips Exeter Academy, which is one of the more prestigious college prep schools in the nation. Phillips Exeter was founded by a man, as you might guess from the name, by the name of John Phillips. His brother, Samuel, founded the hated rival of Exeter, Phillips Andover in Massachusetts, which we will not discuss tonight. But John Phillips had a motto which has stuck with me. Goodness without knowledge is useless. Knowledge without goodness is dangerous. And his point for people who attended Exeter, usually boys, although my class was the first finally to go co-ed, was that not only knowledge needs to be developed, but character needs to be developed as well. And it was his hope that those who attended Phillips Exeter would graduate and go on and be prominent, not only in their professions, but in how they discharge their duties and obligations. So that really started me off with the basis, the underpinning for an ethical background, an ethical way of life, if you will. I had that drummed into me living at Exeter and attending Exeter almost every day.
So, what was it though that led to or enabled you to even get on the path for higher education?
So both my parents were teachers, both had master's degrees. And so education and higher education was something that was obviously talked about. But really the purpose, Wade, in attending a college prep school is, of course, to go on to college. I was the black sheep of my class, if you will, because upon graduating from Exeter, I decided that I really needed a little bit more life experience than what academia had given me. So I enlisted in the U.S. Army at the end of Vietnam, was sent to the intelligence corps, spent a year in language school learning the Laotian language, did all sorts of exciting intelligence things, and then finally mustered out of the Army. At that point, then I continued my education, first at Cornell, and then getting an undergraduate degree from New York University in Manhattan. I had always harbored the desire to be an attorney, so applied to law school and attended law school at Emory University in Atlanta. After that, and I'll continue a little bit because it does sort of form the basis for my movement towards and gravitation towards making ethics more of a practice than a policy. Upon graduation from Emory University, I came back in the Army as an active duty Army lawyer stationed at the United States Military Academy at West Point. So, as an active duty lawyer there, I got to deal with cadets, deal with the cadet honor code. I was a defense counsel for cadets, also a hearing officer on honor code issues. But I was also asked as one of the junior captains at the law office, well, why don't you also, of course, it's never why don't you, it's Echols, you will, also serve as ethics advisor to the command. So to the officers from three-star generals on down to all the cadets, I was also charged with providing ethics training on Army issues and military issues, those types of things. And I found that to be very rewarding and very satisfying, Wade. It was something that I realized I wanted to make a part of the rest of my life. And so I've been forever grateful for many reasons to the Army. But I guess if you had to ask me, where did you start actually wanting to incorporate a sense of ethics into all you do? It would have been at West Point.
So let me pause you there for a moment because I have this innate curiosity about how the world works, should work, could work. In our nation, we have separation of power. We have the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, right?
Right.
And there's debate. There's been debate in recent years about the independence of the Supreme Court, packing the court, how this political party did or didn't pack the court, is or isn't planning to pack the court, because we want justice to be independent. We're actually going to, now we know the tie-in to this ad we're going to show later about this book coming out. That's an aside. You and I know what I'm talking about. The audience doesn't yet. But anyway, so how is the Army attorney independent? How does it, and you were working on ethics and code of honor. That all sounds great. Where does independence come from? Who are you representing or protecting? If, when, how, nobody, somebody?
That's a marvelous question. And it was actually one that was addressed at an Army legal conference at the Army JAG School, which was in Charlottesville, just off the campus of UVA, University of Virginia. And we had a gentleman, all of us military lawyers were in attendance. And we had a gentleman come down from the Pentagon, a very high-ranking civilian attorney. and his thesis was, who is our client? And we all thought, well, that's pretty easy. Your client is where you're billeted, right? So I'm billeted at the United States Military Academy.
What does billeted mean? Because immediately comes to mind, who are you billing? But I don't think that's what you mean.
Yeah, I wish I could have billed. There's a great MASH episode where you may remember Hawkeye sends a bill to the Army for his medical services. I always wanted to send a bill for my legal fees as well. But billeted means you've simply been assigned there. Someone has cut a lawful order assigning you, in this case, me, to the military academy. Now, there are various roles that attorneys play in the Army. I was a defense counsel. As a defense counsel, my number one job is to represent my client to the best of my ability in courts martial or military administrative hearings, those types of things. But to get back to my story, so this gentleman started off, well, okay, your clients are where you're billeted, where you're assigned. But of course, at that point, I was actually working for the Army Intelligence Command. So being a horse's behind, I rose up and said, now, wait a minute. My operation plans are reviewed both through the military and through the intelligence services. So I have clients who go all the way to the Secretary of Defense and all the way to the Director of Central Intelligence. So I guess I have all bunch of clients going up. And then we went on and on and on and on and on. And I'll cut to the chase, so wait. But finally, we ended up saying, well, maybe your client is the Constitution. You have to obey the Constitution. And I think we made it far too difficult. In the military and even in government, in the civilian sector, you are assigned by lawful order to a particular unit. And it may be the 82nd Airborne Division. It may be the military academy. It may be the intelligence community. Those people are your clients. And then within that community, whatever job you are assigned, you will have clients to represent. I hope that didn't make it too muddy.
No, I still think, the people with devious minds, mine sometimes is a tiny bit devious, go in the direction of corruption. How could this be corrupted? Where are the safeguards? Where are the protections? But I think you did answer it well, right? And we can move on. But what would I know, right? This is just fascinating to me. I'm just curious. I don't really know what I'm talking about here. But I do like to think things through. Okay, so now get back to the point where you were sort of bringing your attorney side, your formal training, your higher education in line with some kind of higher calling, desire for coherence on the subject of ethics.
This continued. So when I left active duty in the Army, I took a job as a civilian lawyer for the Army intelligence community, the Army Intelligence Command, called INSCOM at the time. And I ended up, among other things, being the ethics officer for the Army spies. Very interesting occupation, I must say. We probably need to talk about that offline.
A couple of layers of an onion there, but go ahead.
Many, many layers of an onion. After that, Wade, I wanted to try my hand in the civilian sector. So I took a job with a defense contractor, the first of many defense contractors where I worked and for whom I served. Each one of them, and I trust it's no reflection on me, actually got in trouble by violating various federal procurement or other laws. Each violation was discovered, dutifully reported to the government. And the government at that time was in the habit, in terms of seeking remediation and amelioration and making sure that this type of thing never happened again, of making sure that the defense contractors had in place an ethics program, which was actually a compliance program. So at my first DoD contractor job, we did indeed get into trouble. And the general counsel looked around and said, Echols, you have ethics experience. You are now the ethics officer for this particular company. Have a nice day and go to it. Well, I transitioned to other DoD companies, had the same job, and finally ended up at a large company, which has now been swallowed up by Bayer, a company called Monsanto out of St. Louis. And I got there. They had just been spun off as a company by the Pfizer pharmaceutical company. So in effect, although Monsanto had been around for ages and ages and ages, this particular iteration of Monsanto was a brand new company that did not have an ethics program. So I was charged with putting an ethics program in place again. And wouldn't you know, Wade, within 1 week of my arrival at Monsanto, we learned, and this is all public knowledge, so I have no problem sharing it. We learned that Monsanto had violated the United States Foreign Corrupt Practices Act by attempting to bribe officials in Indonesia to accept our programs. So I got to spend the next 6 years of my life putting in place not only an ethics program for a brand new company, but a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act program as well. And I thank someone very much for asking a very good question. I would be happy to respond to that, Wade, if you have time.
Well, I was biting my tongue the minute you mentioned that you went to Monsanto to establish an ethics board, but I didn't know that they were actually acquired by Bayer.
Yeah, Bayer bought them
Interesting.
Bayer bought them, 5, 6, 7 or so years ago. And I think it's been a little bit of a bumpy ride from what I can understand, but I think things are starting to shape up.
Well, we do have to have some offline conversations, or maybe have you on the back on the show. I don't know if I ever shared with you that I was at a little company called Countrywide doing strategic planning. Angelo Mazzillo was the CEO, and I used to ride up and down the elevator with him. Right, in the years before he was on the cover of Time magazine as the #1 cause of the economic meltdown. And I could talk to you about the trading floor down in the basement at Calabasas, where they had 200 traders, stripping out the risk of all the mortgage-backed securities and selling it off like sausage to the proverbial pension funds in Norway. And that's really only the tip of the iceberg of what was going on. That of course I had no idea when I joined the company. But so we have some stories to tell there, which leads into the next question, which we'll answer in the next segment after we go to commercial break. And that question is, so why not go on some program to clean up corporate ethics, corporate abuse? Why not end up in the current president's administration doing a thing called DOGE, right? With your experience. Why go in the direction of animals?
Okay. Well,
let's pivot there. Give us an answer, and then we'll go to commercial break and come back and talk more about it.
All right. It's kind of a lengthy answer, so stop me whenever you need to go to commercial break.
Keep it to less than 2 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. I retired from Monsanto, and of course had to move to Florida because that's the law when you retire. And I found myself, Wade, frankly, with very little to do, and missing not a 9 to 5 routine, but actually missing being a part of accomplishing something worthwhile. So I thought around and thought about it and decided, well, after I read an article on Albert Schweitzer, and then we can come back after the break and kind of talk about that. But a good 10 or 12 years ago in my retirement, I was trying all manner of volunteer efforts. And being a horse's patoot as I am, of course, I always thought I knew how to run the agency a lot better than anybody else did. An attitude that was not really appreciated by most of those who were working in those agencies. So I was kindly asked to move on. But to end this, and then we'll go to commercial break, about 10, 11 years ago in one of the Eastern magazines, Atlantic or New Yorker or New York Times or something like that, there was an article on Albert Schweitzer. And like most people, I kind of had an inkling of who he was. Gee, he's a really good guy, isn't he? But I had no earthly idea the magnitude of this man's thought or accomplishments. And then if you're ready for break, we can come back and then I can pick it up and go from there.
So the impetus was really Albert Schweitzer.
Absolutely. I mean,
all right, we will
my
pick up there.
background, yeah, we'll go ahead. I
We've
told you I'm
already
a recovering lawyer.
and I'm a recovering preacher, right? So we've what a mix. So we've covered Bayer, Bayer aspirin, the German company. Now we're talking about Albert Schweitzer, the great patron saint of Switzerland, as it were. And don't go anywhere. We'll have a commercial break, which will introduce you to what this show is really about, not lawyering in Monsanto at all. And when we come back, we'll find out, what transformed Bob Echols' mission in life. Be right back with more Created in the Image of God with Bob Echols.
The bond between humans and animals has existed for centuries. They walk beside us, work with us, trust us. Yet, in a world shaped by human hands, their well-being is often an afterthought. Robert Echols invites us to see animals not as property, but as lives that matter. Through faith, philosophy, and action for our friends, the animals offers a path to a kinder world. Change begins in the choices we make, how we care, how we advocate, how we protect them. Every small act of kindness creates a ripple. The way we treat animals shapes the world we share. For Our Friends the Animals by Robert Echols. Available now.
Beautiful.
And if you want to go right out and buy that book, there's the QR code. Take a picture. Don't go do that now, because we're about to have Mr. Echols explain how he got interested in Albert Schweitzer and what that led to.
Yeah. So again, there was an article in one of the periodicals about Albert Schweitzer, and I read it, and I was struck by the academic accomplishments of this man, the erudition of this man, the decency of this man. Very quickly to go into his bio, by the age of 30, he'd earned 2 doctorates, had served as a preacher, theologian, teacher, musician, author, scholar, had written excellent books on Jesus, on St. Paul, also books that I believe, I'm not much of a musician, Wade, but are still looked at in terms of his critique and explications of the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Schweitzer was an organist, played the organ in old venerable organs in churches, repaired them, etc. But one of the things that fascinated me, excuse me, was his love, not just of people, but his love for all life, all animals. I was struck by his assessment of our duty as mankind to serve as stewards to all of God's creation, not just a few favored hominins. At that point, Wade, in Central Florida, where I was living, I grew interested in some of the animal shelters there that, as all animal shelters do, needed financial support and financial help. So part of the article on Schweitzer quoted a prayer that is attributed to Schweitzer, although some of his biographers question whether he actually wrote it. But it's so much in keeping with his philosophy, I went ahead and attributed it to Schweitzer anyway. And I just read you the first 2 lines. Hear our humble prayer, O God, for our friends the animals. And I decided I would take that phrase, for our friends the animals, and create a foundation that would provide grants and financial support to animal shelters in the particular area where I lived, which was Central Florida, Marion County. Excuse me. Not used to talking as much as I used to. In fact, some of the animal shelters are still there in the next county over, Levy County. But being involved, seeing the pressures on people trying to deal with sheltered animals, the incredible overcrowding, the mistreatment of animals, it just broke my heart and made me, Wade, want to do whatever I could to start to change the philosophy of people who were engaging in this behavior. So rather than attack from a legal perspective, legal attacks and justice, of course, always being after the fact, I wanted to start something that would change people's minds and stop this kind of behavior from ever occurring in the first place. And that was what led me to kind of resurrect the thoughts of this great man and write the first in what will be, I hope, a quartet of books on a reverence for life.
So, what was Schweitzer's theological basis for this approach, or did he have one?
Well, that's very hotly debated. In fact, there are many who, even though Schweitzer himself was a Lutheran minister, question whether he was truly a Christian or not. And I leave that up to people who are more able to engage in biblical exegesis than I am. But
by whose litmus test?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. His point was that Jesus, in his eyes, was the Messiah who would, at the time of God's choosing, of course, help usher in God's kingdom. However, Schweitzer felt that we humans had an obligation through moral, ethical activity to prepare ourselves for the arrival of that kingdom and to assist Jesus in ushering in the arrival of that kingdom.
So was he anticipating the return of Christ then?
He is anticipating the return of the kingdom led by Jesus. Again, his belief was that the coming of the kingdom, of course, was deemed by Jesus and his followers to be imminent during the time of Jesus. They expected it any day now. Obviously, it did not happen. So
so here's my favorite new biblical quote in the modern era, right? It's one that we've all been familiar with if we studied the Bible way back when. But it takes on a new twist of humor, right? Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump.
I love it. Yeah, I love it.
So who knows? We're living in the time of the end. So he was expecting that Jesus would come and usher in the kingdom, but then he's envisioning that we have a role to play in line with that fact, perhaps preparatory to that event, or how does that?
Absolutely right. It was Schweitzer's belief, and I stand on the shoulders of giants, Wade, so I follow suit as well. I believe the same thing, that we humans, by ethical behavior, not just towards each other, but towards all of God's creation, can prepare ourselves and, again, help Jesus in ushering in the kingdom at the time of God's choosing. That was Schweitzer's belief. I like it. And I've tried to follow it and tried to espouse it in my talks and in my posts. And you'll find it pretty well sprinkled throughout the book, too.
So let me share with you a couple of thoughts that I have. I don't know if we talked about this before. And by the way, I'm seeing lots of comments in the audience. I'm loving them. I got to call out this one because we have an author in the audience who's congratulating you. And don't go anywhere, James. We've got an ad for your upcoming book, as we already tied it in all this talk about Bob being a recovering attorney. But anyway, two things. So back to the litmus test of who is a Christian, right? For me, I spent a decade really focusing on this topic, which I won't get into why here, but it comes down to John 13, verse 35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples. By definition, a Christian would be a follower of Christ, right? A disciple. So you want to look for a sign of who is a Christian. Here it is. By this shall all men, that's all men, anyone, an independent third party, observer from the outside who's not even claiming to be a Christian themselves should be able to identify you as a Christian, a true Christian. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, John 13:35, if you have love one for another. So there's the litmus test. Forget about any other litmus test. That is the litmus test, in my view. So that's step one in this question, right? Was Schweitzer a Christian? Well, did he love? Did he love unconditionally? It seems like he did, and that it went beyond just his fellow human beings, but also to the animals, to all of creation. The other piece I want to throw out here is that, and this ties into the same thing about who is and who isn't a Christian, who is and who is sending somebody else to hell for differing beliefs. And it is the parable of the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God on earth in this case. It's equally applicable. The woman took leaven and she put it in a measure of meal until the whole thing was leavened. But there's a specific word in there. She hid the leaven. She hid the leaven, which means that it wasn't visible from the outside. It was hidden in there doing its work. So it's not up to us to try to determine who is and who isn't. But that work goes on under God's guidance everywhere across this planet, the work of the leaven, which is hidden from sight often. Anyway, those are just two thoughts to throw out there in this context. So now Albert Schweitzer and his love for animals motivated you to shift in this direction. You founded this foundation establishing centers for animals. But what was it about Albert Schweitzer's teachings as to how to go about this that led you to not go into lawfare, but rather go into preventative, education, teaching, training? What is it that you are doing specifically to try to prevent the problem from occurring, if I understood you correctly?
Yeah. Again, if you, in most cases, I never say 100%, but in most cases, if you seek justice for animals, and I see this often on LinkedIn posts, again, this is something after the fact. And almost all the time, the animal in question or the animals in question have previously been harmed, if not killed. So you're really not going to solve the problem. What Schweitzer knew was that we had to reach the hearts and spirits of people, not just by imposing laws from the outside, but by changing people's spiritual beliefs and assessment of their place, their role in the great ladder of creation. And so his thought was, in fact, this was, if you have time for a quick story about one of his trips up the river, his mission in what was then French Equatorial Africa, now Gabon, or Gabon, if you're a French Francophile, took several days of voyaging up the Ogowe River from the Atlantic. And it gave Schweitzer ample time to read, write, pontificate. On one such voyage, Wade, he had spent 2 days covering, by his own admission, sheet after sheet of paper, trying to find what I call the grand unified theory of ethics, something that would combine a spiritual basis with a practical application. So it would be more than just, be nice or love. It would be love, and here's how you demonstrate your love on a 24/7 basis. So he came across a herd of hippopotami. I think I've got the plural correct. And he was so taken by how the adult hippopotami cared for their babies that this care turned into what became his famous phrase, and your German is better than mine, but I'll try it. Ehrfurcht vor dem Leben, what we translate as a reverence for life. And it was, in his mind, a combination of spirituality and yet practical application. He said life is not to be denied, life is to be affirmed. You are to live life every day, and you are to live life in a spiritual, loving way. That really struck me, Wade, because I thought, if we can start to convince people of the spiritual and practical nexus, then we can start to change the types of behavior that I was seeing, resulting in all the abandoned and injured animals in those shelters that I helped fund. So it was really reading about his combination of spirituality and practical application that turned me away from, all right, let's just sue the bastards. Well, it's too late. The animals have already been harmed, and all you're doing is taking legal action against one entity, one person, perhaps. You're not changing hordes of people. They're still out there waiting to create the same problems that you're dealing with. That's how it happened.
Well, and of course, there are any act against an animal, would be considered evil by one standard. And certainly gross acts in terms of the way in which modern modern agriculture and farming treats animals, or maybe even historically, these can be egregious. There's this thing called, ignorance of the law is no excuse. But what I'm getting at right now is the perpetrators of some of this aren't as aware as they should be, right? Going into this and what causes these actions. There's a lack of education, a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding, that going after them legally after the fact in this antagonistic, we need to get our justice approach, is maybe not changing hearts anyway in the way that it should.
No, it's definitely not. I think there is some ignorance out there. I think it's fair to say, Wade, that most of us know how meat ends up nicely wrapped and presented in your supermarket. We choose not to look at it. We choose to deny it. We choose to put it in the far recesses of our psyches, but we really know. But what has to happen?
But there's this approach to it, and then there's that approach to it. There's an approach that might be considered ethical by one standard and unethical by another standard.
I agree wholeheartedly.
You're like calling people to a higher standard of ethics, one inspired by Albert Schweitzer. Let me give a practical example here. We have chickens, and when we decided to get chickens, we had no experience with chickens. I know that my grandfather in Sweden had chickens, and I know that he was of the kind of farmer that would grab the chicken by the head and spin it around when it was time to get rid of the chicken. Right? He was the kind of man who, when they had cats, and when the cat would have kittens, those kittens would get thrown up against the side of the barn.
Yeah, or drown.
Well, he wouldn't drown them. I think he was too kind and compassionate, which might, again, now somebody can post the comment, how do you throw kittens against the barn, kind and compassionate? How do you use that in the same sentence? Well, his ethical standard was, I don't believe my grandfather would have ever drowned them. I can't imagine, because he was actually a good man, a kind man. You follow me?
I do.
But anachronistically, by our standards, this horrible, horrible thing, right? So here we have chickens now, and I have no experience with chickens, and we're trying to protect the chickens by putting them in the coop so the critters don't get them, right? Yeah. The raccoons, the possums. And it took me a few weeks, and we have 3 roosters. It took me a few weeks to figure out how to do this in a kind way. It took me actually having to deal with it, having to go out there and with my own hands grab these chickens because they like to roost on top of the chicken coop inside the
Sure.
big cage. But it's not really safe because a critter can get in there. So they need to be inside the coop locked down because critter will find a way to get inside the outside cage. We've had that experience. So it took me a while to grab a chicken, sort of gently put it under my arm, actually put my hand under there, let it clasp its feet onto my finger,
Mhm.
and then lower it in and move it towards where it could then clasp its feet on the roosting peg. And after after a week or two of this, the chickens learned the drill and they cooperated the way a house pet would cooperate.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, I'd be grabbing them, they'd be flapping their wings, and I'd be trying to hold them, and I'd be worried about them damaging their wings, and the roosters would be like pecking at me. And you follow me? So
Absolutely.
it took practical experience to learn this. And you would have to be around animals, and you would have to teach your children how to do this and how to be kind to the animals. The sentiment in one sense might come naturally, but how to actually do it might not.
Yeah. I think that what is really important is what drives the action, Wade. And I've tried to differentiate on my posts and in the book, and obviously, again, standing on the shoulders of Schweitzer, between what I call natural rights and human rights, or human bestowed rights. Natural rights flow from God. God's creation, in my view, when you were created by God, you immediately are possessed of natural rights. Human bestowed rights can be abrogated, annulled, abridged, debated, interpreted. So your view of how you handle the chickens might not be the same view of another human. And other humans might have a view, well, why are you even keeping chickens? Why are you restraining God's creation? Why aren't they allowed to do whatever it is they do naturally, and so on and so on? So for all those, and again, I see the posts on LinkedIn and read them constantly. Animal rights, we're all in favor of animal rights. Well, but they're really your rights that you've decided to flow down to animals because you think it's a nice thing to do. Other people will disagree with you violently. There's some who think hunting is actually good. It's good to kill animals out there because we manage the population and we kill off the stragglers and all those types of things. So that's a good thing. Others say, no. That's simply a right that you bestowed upon yourself, and it makes you feel better taking the life of God's creature. So I think what Schweitzer would say is we start with natural rights. All creatures are created by God. It is our obligation to show a reverence for life as much as we possibly can. Now, he would also say, wait a minute, we're also human. There are limits to what we can do, and we are going to be confronted, all of us, by situations in which our ethics, our reverence for life are going to be tested. We're going to have to make decisions between two extremes, between two animals. Whom do we save? Triage, all those types of things. What Schweitzer would say is you've got to do the best you can to act according to love and let love and God guide you.
Well, I think this is a great segue to our next commercial break. When we come back in, I want to dive deeper into that thorny set of intermingling, balancing ethical issues. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more from Bob Echols.
They say the courtroom is where truth comes to light. For one neurosurgeon, it became a test of everything he believed in. His skills, his integrity, his resilience, and his belief in his chosen field. A patient's life forever changed. A Native American husband searching for accountability. A skilled defense attorney trained by the Native American psychologist, and a doctor caught in the middle, fighting to defend not just his actions and his humanity, but medicine in general. Written in real time as the trial proceeded, About Not Losing takes you behind the scenes of a high-stakes malpractice trial, offering a rare look through the eyes of the accused, the attorney fighting by his side, and the psychologist analyzing it all. But this is more than a story about the law. It's a story about the many diverse people involved in a trial. It's also a story of resilience in the face of adversity, of the unlikely friendships that can emerge from conflict, and the strength it takes to move forward when the world seems against you. And even after the trial ended, a recurring dream compelled him to address the lingering questions, turning pain into purpose and closure into a deeper understanding of what truly matters. About not losing. A high-stakes trial, life's purpose found. Scan the QR code to get your copy now.
I will.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God. Wade Fransson here, your host, with Bob Echols, who is a devoted follower of Albert Schweitzer and putting his teachings around our friends, the animals, into practice. Right before the break, we were talking about the sometimes conflicting intermingling of ethical claims, right? So for me, Bob, it always goes back to that statement in the Garden of Eden. Adam was put here with a purpose, which was to dress and keep the garden. But that's a very vague, general statement. And as you were saying, some people would say to dress and keep the garden, you must allow limited hunting of certain predator species or even of certain non-predator species due to overpopulation, right? I don't know if it's really true or not. Everybody's heard that lemmings overpopulate and run themselves off a cliff, right? That there is some management role, and in that management role, certain decisions have to be made that some people will applaud and other people will recoil in horror from, like when my grandfather used to throw those kittens up against the barn wall.
No,
The kids
absolutely.
recoiled in horror, and I don't advocate it because I don't think any child should be subjected to that. But that's a modern sensibility. The world used to be a lot harder and a lot colder, right?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about it, Wade. I believe that we are evolving. If I didn't believe that, then I would simply throw in the towel and say, well, not only am I on a fool's errand, but I must be Don Quixote tilting at windmills, thinking that anything is going to change. I do believe we evolve. I do believe our mentality evolves. I do believe that humans can get better and can improve. The question is, how long is it going to take? And what are the catalysts that are out there that are going to bring that about? And can we agree on some definition of rights other than those that you and I may espouse because they please us? But you've talked about the difficulty in making decisions. Here's one example that plagued Schweitzer. So Schweitzer almost had a touch with animals similar to that attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. He could talk, he could tame wild animals, and he came across one day at his mission in Africa a wounded pelican. The wings had been wounded. So he, of course, named it Parsifal after the hero in the last Wagner opera, tended to it and did cure it. And Parsifal, to repay Schweitzer, and I'll get to the dilemma in a minute, but Parsifal, to repay Schweitzer, became a guard pelican and would spend every night on guard outside the sleeping quarters where Schweitzer was billeted. But here is the dilemma. In order to keep Parsifal alive, Schweitzer had to pull fish from the river to feed Parsifal, the pelican. That was the pelican's only diet. You couldn't give him a diet of French fries or tofu or soy. It had to be fish. And Schweitzer wrote, we live in obviously an imperfect world. We live in a prey-predator world. Tennyson was right. This is a world red in tooth and claw, no doubt about it. But Schweitzer would say two things. Number one, even when you're pulling the fish out of the river, our job is to try to alleviate suffering as much as we can. The pelican was suffering. Feeding the pelican was alleviating that suffering. Didn't do much for the fish, I'll have to admit, but Schweitzer would also say, all right, in taking that action, you incur what he called guilt. Now, this is the German word, Wade, Schuld, which has various interpretations.
Yeah, it's Schuld, not Schande,
Yes,
which is shame.
it's for Schweitzer, it became an obligation to do good going forward. What we would say, paying it forward. He would say the only way you can atone for having taken those fish from the river, even though you were helping a suffering entity, is to do good going forward and do the very best you can. Is that perfect? Absolutely not. But it's in his mind and from my assessment, the very best we can do. We are, as Schweitzer wrote, every time you go outside, you're going to cause damage to some living entity somewhere. It's going to happen. Some of us cause more than others, unfortunately. The best you can do is accept that burden of obligation to do good going forward. And that's what struck me as something maybe that we could, you say teach, I don't know, inculcate, at least preach, whatever the term is, to get people to start changing their behavior. At least that's my hope.
Well, it's interesting, and I've always loved and been fascinated by language. The German word for Schuld, it carries the same meaning of also debt, right? Ich bin schuldig means it doesn't really mean I'm guilty. It means I am obligated.
Right.
But it is the word for guilt as well, because you have guilt, but it also means you have debt. So
Yes.
yeah, you pay it forward, and that debt can be atoned. Guilt can be cleaned up by paying the debt in that sense. But now we're into theological debates. I love the example of the pelican and the fish, and yeah, that's a conundrum. We can decide to become vegetarian, right?
Yes.
But yeah, we're not yet. Or maybe I should ask you, what do you think of Isaiah chapter 11, right? The wolf will lay down with the lamb, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. Is that on the horizon? Is that coming physically? Because if you say that the creation is even imperfect, much less somehow wrong or bad, right? What does that
Yes.
what does that do of our what does that do to our theology or our view of God? Are we evolving and maturing beyond a belief in a divine being who is only good, but who managed to create something like what we see, where pelicans eat fish?
It's very difficult, and probably echelons above my brain. I can only tell you what I believe. So you've asked, is the lion going to lie down and so forth? Well, Paul says yes. In Romans 8:19 through, what is it? You know better than I, 22, I think. All creation groans. All creation. We are waiting, all creation, not just a few humans again. All creation waits for the coming of the kingdom. When the kingdom comes, then all of that pain and suffering shall vanish. It is our job, says Schweitzer, and I again agree, for whatever that's worth. I'm sure Albert is up in heaven saying, thank you, Echols, or your agreement really means something to me. But I think our job as humans is to bring a sense of the ethical into a world where it is in very short supply. There will always be a prey-predator relation until the coming of the kingdom, but we can try to alleviate suffering amongst all of God's creatures to the maximum extent practicable. And that's our calling.
Well, I might be remiss if I didn't throw a nod to my Baha'i audience and my own Baha'i identity here. The Baha'i faith is a newer religion, right? One that was launched from Iran in the 1800s. And as such, it has holy writings, which we deem to be holy, that are more updated and modern and address modern issues more directly, even, for example, mentioning America, the great republic of the West, in the holy writings, as well as modern nations identified by their actual names, not through the vague mists of prophetic interpretation, right? So why do I say that? Well, it talks about animals, and it talks about treating animals, and it talks about how we must teach our children to be kind to animals. God is good is sharing by request a quote from Proverbs. Well, the righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel, to show that this is in the Bible as well. But again, more specifically in these more modern writings, it is our duty and our obligation to teach our children to be kind to animals. So having those chickens is helpful to my children. So rather than modeling the behavior of throwing the kittens against the wall, I am modeling the behavior of how to treat the chickens, right? So we have an obligation to continually advance that kingdom and its goals, right? Of love and kindness, universal love and acceptance and forgiveness and kindness. So I love that you're extending this on out to the animals and driving our attention to the need for education in that area and in that arena. So
Yeah.
in practical terms, give us a couple of practical examples of how that might work.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick it up, this effort, Wade, because it seems to me that with the death of Albert Schweitzer in 1965, whatever momentum there was for reverence for life just sort of crashed and burned and cratered. And if I can pick it up in some way, then it's sort of like almost a relay race, if you will. You know, the baton has been handed to me and I've got it in my particular lane. At some point, I'm going to have to hand it off to somebody else, because this is going to have to be a movement that is perpetrated by one person after another after another. You're talking about changing people's hearts and minds, putting a spirituality in there. People have to be open and receptive to that. It cannot be commanded. It cannot be ordered. No judge can say, Wade, you will adopt a spirituality. It's not going to happen.
So you're saying that, for example, and I'm not as familiar as I should be with the activities of these groups, but let's say Greenpeace and animal rights activists. You're saying that their work is not getting the job done because maybe the approach isn't the best one?
Let me give you one example. I was just thinking about that before. When I was back in Florida before I started my foundation, I wanted to bring together small groups of animal rights people from that particular area. And I thought, why don't we form a coalition? And I even think we had a name, Caritas, charity or kindness, something like that. So at our first meeting, Wade, and of course I paid for lunch for everybody, the members spent time, most of the time after they'd finished the lunch that I paid for, bickering with each other and pulling up old canards, old saws, old grudges. Well, you did this. Well, what about that? And I think the problem is, again, all these groups, depending on not depending on the size, but none of them really wants to pull together. Each one has its own territory marked out. And of course, human ego plays a great role in that. I want to be a very important person in this particular animal rights group, rather than simply a disciple advancing the cause of love and mercy. There's not really a lot of promotion and money and airtime in that. Thanks to you inviting me on, there's a little bit here. But I think each one, that's fine. But to try to promote human bestowed rights is, to me, folly. Because they, as I said, they can be ignored, fought over, litigated, delayed, misinterpreted, and the beat goes on. Either you believe in natural rights from God or you don't. And I think the criterion that we need
We
to
hold these
apply.
truths to be self-evident, right?
Yes, that all God's creatures are born with innate worth and value. We are simply one creature out of how many millions of species? Some of your audience will know, I don't, but in the millions, I know.
And I have to pontificate a little bit here. So one interpretation of Isaiah 11, this is kind of my own, actually. I'm sure others have come up with it, but I feel like I kind of came up with it on my own for what it's worth. What that means is, don't take it with a grain of salt, take it with an entire salt shaker. It's worthless. But still, you could say that the lion is Judah, right? And the lamb is Jesus, and the wolf is Islam, right? And these religions must come together. These religions must make peace with each other. You follow me? That is what symbolizes the kingdom of God, because to your point, people supposedly wanting the same thing are bickering now. Or it goes back to, what is the sign of a true Christian? That they loved one another, right? That they have pure and unconditional love. And it's obvious. You know what it smells like, you know what it looks like, you know it when you see it, and you know when you're not seeing it. You know when somebody claiming to have brotherly love is a hypocrite, because they're sending people to hell over the tiniest little doctrinal differences.
Yes.
So, those are just some sort of meta statements around this topic that you've correctly called out. And it's interesting that you are trained as an attorney, and yet these groups which seem to think that is the way to litigate your way forward, right? But you're trained, and you see through that's not actually going to move the needle, right? We changed the title of this show to Building Vibrant Communities, partly for that reason. It used to be Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society. That's what I was trying to do, is get discussion going. What is the role of religion in society? Well, the role of religion in society is to build vibrant communities, right? So how do we do that, right? Let's get practical. Let's get real. How do we build vibrant communities, diverse communities, communities that, like the kind you were building by providing the bread and the fish, the loaves and the fish, and then the people came together for a meeting, and yet they were bickering and squabbling, couldn't arrive at a consensus on how to actually address or approach this topic.
You've got it.
So we're going to go to a quick commercial break. This is something I'm personally involved in. I helped found this foundation, and you'll see another practical example of how one can approach some of these topics. We'll be right back to look at some of the audience comments. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Double your impact with our matching grant. Until the end of 2025, every tax-deductible donation to the Royal Falcon Foundation, up to $1,000, will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit our website to donate now, or email info@royalfalconfoundation.org for more details. Together, we can make a greater difference.
Lovely.
Well, and I can tell from this meeting and this discussion that we have to work in more animal activities. We have introduced bees. We have a Hillcrest Orchard Camp program here in Wisconsin. We're building something out called Soul Seeds, in which we plant a community garden, raised bed gardens, and help try to get young people to sort of be anchored, be grounded literally to that garden and care for the garden. And we thought about how, introducing a few chickens might be, a good step there for some of the reasons we've talked about, but also this idea of sustainability and being able to care for and provide for yourself and any pelicans that might come along that need providing for as well.
Very good. No, that's a lovely foundation. Well done.
So let's take a look here. I think you've been able to see some of the chat messages. Anything that you wanted to call out? I've shared a couple of them.
Let's take a look. Well, I know somebody was very upset with me early on for equating ethics and Monsanto in the same sentence. And I would say that at the end of my tenure at Monsanto was awarded not a prize, but I suppose a title of the most ethical company in America at the time. This was 2008, 2009. So for one brief shining moment,
based on what?
Based on criteria from a group of not secretaries as in clerical, but secretaries as in board members who put together a criteria for what makes an ethical corporation. So we didn't really think, because of our past and because of Monsanto's reputation, that we had a chance, but we did. So the point is, it can be done.
Was this a most improved award?
No.
So, well, but look, I've been a management consultant. I shared earlier I did strategic planning for a Fortune 500 financial services company that was then, again, the CEO called out Time Magazine as the #1 cause of the economic meltdown. Ethics at the corporate level, in my opinion, kind of starts and ends with your fiduciary responsibility, which is to maximize shareholder value. Now, there are new models that seek to change that, to expand on that and introduce other 360-degree kinds of criteria. Who are your stakeholders, being ethical to all your stakeholders, not just the shareholders. You follow me? Like also employees. Yeah. And then they're seeking to sort of cobble on environment, right? But it's kind of like a Frankenstein monster, to be honest, when you really dig into it, because the ethical fiduciary responsibility to shareholders is to maximize shareholder value. So in what sense, what were those criteria by which Monsanto was, and I don't mean to put you down or the work that you did. You obviously helped accomplish something phenomenal.
Yeah.
But by what standard, by what criteria? Because anyone from the outside would be tempted to just scream hypocrite at the top of their lungs.
Well, and people still do. And it's not just at Monsanto, it's at all corporations for the reasons you state. I mean, corporations are set up to make money. And that's why they're there. And if they're failing, then they are certainly not meeting their duties. Most ethics programs, particularly if you're in a regulated industry like defense, are actually compliance programs, because if you fail to comply with the law, then you can actually be shut down. So for the regulated industries, and even now all of them are regulated these days, the opportunities for true ethical decision making are not as apparent, let's say, or as frequent as they might have been to Socrates talking to the youths in Athens. However, there are opportunities. Here's one. So if you are a global company, then obviously you're going to be doing business around the world. You will be subject rather to various laws of various harshness, environmental, human resources, those types of things. You have a choice that you can make if you are an American corporation. Am I going to impose American environmental standards, even though I'm doing business in, you pick a country, Gabon? Am I going to impose the same personnel standards? Here's another example. So when I worked in the defense business, we had offices behind the Iron Curtain. Well, the rules for, let's say, hiring people were a little bit different than the types of rules and regulations that we were accustomed to. So if you wanted to hire a secretary in Ukraine or Russia or a place like that, you could state in your advertisement, must be a stunning model, no more than 24 years old. And you could put all physical descriptions, which in this country would get you not only fired, but on LinkedIn and every other social media. Well, again, do you choose, because you are operating in that country, to follow those particular procedures, or do you choose to impose those that you feel better reflect your own sense of values? Well, most companies will choose the latter because it feels better. It's the right thing to do. And actually, in the end, Wade, it is doing more to live up to a fiduciary duty if you are imposing higher standards than if you are allowing people to hire or befoul the environment to lower standards. So, yes, people look at corporate ethics as the ultimate oxymoron, like military justice, but it's not really. You have to get past the cynicism and realize you have people who are working and striving to please a whole bunch of different masters and mistresses, from those who want maximum profit to those who want maximum goodness. And somewhere, perhaps in the middle, lies your sense of ethics.
Yeah, I mean, it very much, maybe this isn't the best analogy, but the analogy of the onion and the onion layers, right? It's complex. The world is complex, right? Yeah. I spent time in India, and I'm aware that if you shut down a factory where child labor happens, some of those children no longer having that opportunity for them will end up in the sex traffic trade.
Yep.
In the sex, so you shut down a tea factory that has child labor, and some of those children will now become sex slaves. Yes. So, it's almost like the fish and the pelican.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone goes back to the famous Tylenol case 30 or 40 years ago, where poison was discovered in vials of Tylenol, and the company made the decision, we're going to pull all of our product off the shelf. Even though it was probably limited maybe to one store in one city, they made a very expensive decision and led to the type of packaging that we have today with pharmaceuticals and medicine. Again, a cynic would say, oh, no, come on. They only did that because it looks good. And yes, it cost them some money, but look at all the good PR they had. Well, I think that's being a little cynical. Again, you have human beings struggling with these types of decisions and trying to do the right thing while being pulled in 19 different directions. So a shout out to corporate ethics people and those in management who are indeed trying to please everybody and still maintain that ethical compass. It's not easy.
Well, my own take on that gets to the book of Matthew. I'm doing a series right now on a different channel for different people on the Bible, and we're going to focus on Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount being a centerpiece of that. But the whole Gospel of Matthew is written with a heavy thread of justice and judgment running through it. From Matthew 7, where Jesus says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And then whatever standard of judgment you use, that is what will be used against you. So for me, the golden rule, or the North Star of ethics, is an obscure principle that it is an abomination to God to have two sets of weights. And what does that mean? Well, to me, it means that, you can't be a hypocrite. I mean, it's okay actually to have two sets of weights if you disclose you have one for buying and one for selling, because business has to make a profit, right? The hypocrisy comes in not disclosing that there are two sets of weights, right? So the hypocrisy is either a double standard, which is to treat something that is the same differently, to treat two things that are the same differently, or a false equivalency, which is to treat two things that are different as though they were the same.
Yeah.
These are the two sides of the coin of hypocrisy. And to me, all ethics boils down to that, because God says whatever standard you use in judgment, it will be applied against you. So the law in God's sight is flexible enough to be personalized and to take into account your own moral compass. Is that not what that is saying? And God, the ultimate judge, is capable of doing this and nailing your butt to the wall. You know what I mean? Based on whatever standards you set, whatever level of integrity you attempt to bring, it will fail.
Yeah.
None of us are not hypocrites. So to be applying labels and judgments and accusations, and this is one of the problems I have with organizations that we talked about earlier, like maybe Greenpeace or others. And here I am judging them. But my point is, you don't get to go after the bad guys because you are the bad guy.
Yeah.
Right. So now, obviously, if you're in a role of a lawyer or a judge, you have a responsibility, and it's a very serious and weighty one. Don't envy that. You know what I mean? But it does come down to this idea of hypocrisy. And then you fast forward in Matthew, and it says, talking about the return of Jesus, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will separate the sheep from the goats. Matthew 25. And I used to apply that very personally. I gave a sermon in Estonia, actually, because I did work behind the Iron Curtain. I know how things are different. I was actually illegally bringing in groups of worshipers in with the approval of the Soviet era tourist agencies who wanted the valuta, right? So we could come and worship, wink, wink, nod, nod, behind the Iron Curtain under Gorbachev, because the economy was failing over there. But anyway. In Estonia, I gave this sermon where, how do we determine whether we're sheep or a goat? But I kind of missed the boat, because it says he will judge the nations. He will judge the nations. And the standard that the nations have established, upon which they will now be judged, is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, established in 1948. The nations have declared the standard, and they are applying it amongst themselves, and very imperfectly, I might add, very hypocritically, I might add. If you look at what's going on the issue of human rights globally and at the United Nations, and who sits on the council and how these judgments are passed, it is abominable.
Yeah.
And thereby the world has set up the standard by which it is being judged today. So the evolution of humankind is progressing, and we have established the standard of judgment by which we must move forward. And that judgment is being brought down upon us all by virtue of having established a clear objective standard, if you will. It's fascinating to me, this topic of ethics. And I think and to bring this back home, even as I pontificate here, what better way than to look at how we are treating animals, right? Who in that sense don't have human rights. The animals don't have human rights. We've established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But we will, in a way, be judged by how we even treat the animals.
Well, I think we will be judged by how we treat all life. I mean, after all, humans are animals too. And we talked a little bit before about natural rights versus human bestowed rights. And those are all very noble. And it's certainly worthwhile compiling them in a folder somewhere, so we have something to strive for. But our nation was founded, we hold these truths to be self-evident. These truths come from God. They don't come from the mind of man. because the mind of man, as we've said before, with any right, I can look at it, ignore it, argue it, annul it, sit on it, delay its implementation, because that my view of what that right means may vary with yours. But natural rights, the right to exist, the right to live freely as God intended, if we extend those to animals, we certainly are going to start extending those same rights to our fellow human beings. And the type of warfare and bloodshed and just horrific abuse of people, much less abuse of animals, will stop. But it will not stop, in my view, until there is a common belief of the worth of life itself. Life is so precious. As far as we know, this is the only planet, at least in our solar system, maybe in our galaxy, maybe in our universe, we don't know, where life is not only existent, but has evolved, that you and I can sit here and talk to each other and your wonderful audience over this computer. So it's a precious, precious thing. And if Schweitzer would say, and I think many other great men and women would say, as you treat the least of me, so you will treat all. And if we abuse or suffer the abuse or permit the abuse of one of God's creatures, it's very difficult to argue against a similar abuse being levied on another of God's creatures. They all have to be treated with the same kindness and respect, if you will, the same reverence.
Ehrfurcht. Thank you so much.
Ehrfurcht. Your German is still better than mine.
I love languages. Well, Bob, thank you so much. Really, I think we've covered everything we can. We're a little over time, which is not uncommon on this show. But thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to just then, what's the word I'm looking for? It's getting late. Discharge. I'm going to discharge my last duty, which is to share with the audience a sneak peek from next week's show. Any closing words that you want to leave with us, Bob, before I do so?
I will just thank everyone first for attending. I will thank you for giving me the opportunity. I would ask everyone, please consider adopting a reverence for life as your ethos, the belief that all of us have a sacred duty to serve as stewards of all God's creation. Do that, and we will start to see appropriate changes in our world. God bless you all.
Thank you. And with that, I'm signing off. And if you're interested, stay tuned and watch the preview of coming attractions, the sneak peek from next week's show. Until then, may God be with you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everyone. It's Wade Fransson with another sneak peek of Created in the Image of God. I am here in the studio with Edwina Cowell, who is the founder of Spiritual Playdate. I've known Edwina for a number of years. We met over the phone. We met at the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette. We met at the Parliament of World Religions in Toronto, and we've worked together on and off. But I'm only now having her on the show. Don't ask me why. I am so excited to have you in the studio, Edwina. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, the show we're preparing is about authentic leadership and its foundation, which, as we've talked about, has to start young. And in this sneak peek, you're going to talk about how this is rooted in empathy, humility, and selflessness. Tell us a little bit about what the viewers can expect on March 11th when I have you on the show.
So I'm excited to be talking about reaching our children at a younger age and starting to give them social, emotional, and spiritual life skills. And these are things across the board, things like respect, things like compassion, empathy, and forgiveness and gratitude. If we also give them some religious literacy, because we want them to have a realistic worldview. So all of these topics that can be done with kids are things that oftentimes parents don't start until they're 11, 12 years old. And that's really too late. We need to be working with kids at a younger age and give them a strong foundation so that when they get to middle school, when they're bullied, they have some understanding of their connection with other human beings, the understanding of the golden rule, which is essentially respect at its core. How do we respect someone that's being unkind to us? So we have a lot of different resources and approaches and different fun. We try to make it relevant for today's parents and teachers and kids. And so, but we're going to be talking a lot about respect, specifically the Respect Challenge, which is a fun kind of a viral video challenge that we're putting out there for folks, and just different ways to approach all of this, but especially with kids that are a little bit younger.
Well, and we're also talking about the family reunion that we're going to be working together on this fall, where we hope to bring together families of different faiths and have activities for children, young, emerging teenagers, and those who are working with these groups all together in a location in Texas. And as we've talked about all of this, there's this challenge we have in today's society. We would really have to go back 100 years now in the Western world to a time when, everyone grew up going to some kind of church, right? Fast forward, everyone wants to have diversity. Everyone wants to be able to expose their children to a variety of religious beliefs so that their children can choose and find the true value of spiritual learning, right? Not just what your denomination happens to teach, right? And even those that try to do this find that it's difficult to emerge from the silos of traditional, Sunday school or whatever you might learn at synagogue. So your materials reach across that and provide this diverse approach to teach this respect, not just for those who believe like you, but for those who might believe a little differently. Tell us a little bit about that.
So one of our core principles that we stand for is making sure that we promote critical thinking skills. And because in the past, the approach that we have always used has been in silos. We've all been in these bubbles and steeped in a particular faith ideology. Many times when we come out of those, we are not really aware that there are all these different belief systems in the world. I, as a parent, and our team, we try very much to look at the to use the approach of trying to develop truth students. There are truth that you're going to find in many places, and when you start to explain the world to kids and young adults and us, frankly, you find that when you give them context, when you give them some literacy around some of these subjects, they will find truth in many places, and they will find something for themselves. And that's really what we want, because that's when it really rings true. When you're steeped in something without any context and you haven't been taught to think critically, there comes a time in your life when you start to question all that. And many people throw that right out the window and walk away. We see so many people walking away from all organized faith. And frankly, many times we say we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We want kids to seek truth, and adults, young adults, all of us. So that's part of our approach. All of our sessions, all of our work is done in the Socratic methods. It's all posed in series of questions, because Ionesco told us it is the question that enlightens, not the answer. You give an answer and it does not turn on their brain. They walk around with an answer. You give them a question and you start letting all of the people that are participating answer, and suddenly their brains lit up with all these ideas. So that's very much our approach.
Thank you. I just love that. And I'm even more excited than ever before. This sneak peek is supposed to get our audience excited, but it's getting me excited about having you on the show. And for those who are going to tune in on March 11th, you see those multicolored balloons up there. What you've just heard from Edwina Cowell is that those balloons are not just filled with hot air. There is a lot of rigor and a foundation underneath Spiritual Playdate. So you don't want to miss episode 4 141, airing on March 11th, 8 p.m. Central Time on Created in the Image of God. See you there.